Hello and welcome to the Last Word on Spurs. We are your multi-award winning Tottenham Hotspur podcast, and we do return on the eve of Spurs going back into battle in the Europa League in one of two absolutely huge crunch games that Spurs take to battle on the European stage, and where we've just heard the news coming out of Ange Postecoglou's press conference that Tottenham might not sign any more players during this January transfer window. The news every Tottenham fan dreaded to hear. Will that be coming to reality? We'll find out during this wonderful show. Joining me, look, one very special guest we've invited back. Lovely to have him here. You've probably heard his dulcet tones a lot during the Ange pressers, both the natural and the embargoed section. He's here. He's there. He's everywhere. Quite literally, this man that's back on our show. Alongside me, I keep on saying it, the blossoming relationship of this duo is not going anywhere during this January transfer window. I'm trying to have back alongside me the wonderful Sean Butler over at the Spurs Talk Show. Shawnee, how are you, my man? Love to be back alongside me.
It's great to be back, Ricky. Great to meet George as well. Looking forward to a good show. But yeah, disappointing last bit of news to come out of Tottenham there, isn't it? You're hoping. You saw Fabrizio, I think, the other day say maybe two names are being worked on, and then Ange comes out and gives you the slap around the face that you need as a wake up to say, no, probably not going to happen. So yeah, it's always sad when you hear that sort of news. But either way, we're going to talk about it. It's great to be with you guys and also to the chat. Shout out to the chat.
Shawnee, thank you so much. And like I say, I know many are finding shows as therapy at the moment, quite literally Spurs therapy. So take a seat in the therapy booth. Let's see what we can do for you for the next hour and a bit and see if we can soothe some of that frustration amongst the Spurs fan base. A man that's going to certainly help us do that and is, you'd argue, trying to soothe Ange Postecoglou's frustration at times, depending on the questions he's being asked at certain points during pressers. We've got the wonderful George Sessions joining us. George, Tottenham Hotspur correspondent. George was back on Last One on Spurs. I've got to say, in the very early infancy days, must be on audio. So it's a long-term relationship with George. Lovely to have him back on here. George, how are you? I think it's fair to say never a dull moment whenever you come on here. There's always something bubbling along in the Spurs soap opera.
Oh, God, yeah. I think we've had better times, haven't we? We've certainly had better times. It's a difficult moment in it to be a Spurs fan. But, I mean, can't wallow too much because I still think we're going to win a trophy. I'll put it out there early on. I've still got the faith, blind faith, naive, call me whatever you want. But I honestly still got a bit of hope in me. And yeah, I was at the training ground today, saw Kieran Romero training, which put a smile on my face. And hopefully he's back soon because, God, Spurs need some players, don't they?
No, they do. They do indeed. And I think, the news of the fact Spurs might not sign any players is definitely worrying an element of the fan base. You can understand that. There is that argument Spurs are getting players back, and there also will be that feeling that quite literally the damage has already been done in terms of the league form as to why Spurs haven't brought players in already. But so much to discuss and more during this show. There's many, many big fans of Shawnee's headset there. Sean, did you borrow it from Cammy's headset? Big up Ricky, George and Sean. How do we get out of this mess? The shit doesn't roll uphill, sadly. It doesn't. It's very tough times in the nature of being a Spurs fan right now. And I do find a lot of these shows that and the same as Shawnee does as well on the Spurs Talk Show, sometimes when you digest it, you speak about it, you come away feeling easier. Then you wake up the next morning and you realise, God, we've got the same problems again. And there's someone else that's gone down. I mean, this football club, I honestly think, many think it is a social experiment at times. It is absolutely bizarre what we're going through. But as George says as well, we have to believe it's going to get better because otherwise it is going to kill us. It is going to kill us. Football in perspective, it is going to kill us. Right. We're going to be discussing during this show where we stand, of course, on Ange Postecoglou, his future, where we are in terms of the latest injury update. We had news coming out of the football club earlier during the day that Sarr becomes the latest Tottenham player to go down with injury. But George very kindly actually reported live from the training ground earlier that Hotspur way on Wednesday that Kieran Romero is back in training. George did see it with his own eyes, so we can confirm one is definitely coming back as one drops down. So it literally is get one back, drop one back. What can I say? It's life as a Tottenham fan. What I am going to do, look, I'm going to shut up and I'm going to send it over to the wonderful Sean Butler to kickstart this episode of Last One on Spurs. Shawnee, I'll hand the reins to you. We can't break that, can we? We can't.
I don't know, those reins can look a little bit fluffy at times. Thanks, Ricky. George, first question for you, mate, is all about Ange Postecoglou's, I guess, the safety of his job, right? So, we and the fans have had this going back and forth over the last few games. Is the next game a must-win for him? And yet the performances aren't getting any better. The results aren't really getting any better. Yet out of the club, we haven't really heard anything to suggest that they are looking to make any changes in the short term, at least. They seem to be backing him. But we have got 2 big games this week, Hoffenheim first and then Leicester in the Premier League. And again, the rumours are out there. If it's a bad week, it might be his time at the bar. If not, we can carry on. Where do you see it going, George, in regards, bad outcomes? If bad outcomes do happen this week, is there a tipping point? Do you think that Daniel Levy won't be able to carry on, or do you think he's gonna stick with Ange until some future point, regardless of what happens in the next 2 games?
Yeah, it does feel like a big week. I think you don't really see many clubs putting out statements saying, we've got confidence. So the way it happens is, it'll be through sources, and all us journalists have had the same sort of conversations this week that, Ange has got the support of the board in terms of they don't want to sack him. They've not brought anyone in for him yet other than Anthony Kinski. But it does feel like a big week just because, the last few defeats, as bad as they've been, they have largely been away from home. I remember the Arsenal game, the Everton game. And we're going back to Tottenham on Sunday to play Leicester, which obviously, Leicester have lost 7 in a row. It's, you can't, it feels like you just cannot lose that game. Right. Even though Spurs will have, more players unavailable than available. But no, I think this week is big for Ange. He needs a result against Hoffenheim. I probably would say a win, but then you look at the squad going out there, maybe a draw, I think would be fine. He's not going to get sacked after a draw, I don't think. And then he's got a win on Sunday. I think that's kind of clear. And there is kind of, Romero's in training, Bentancur's, going to be available for this Hoffenheim game because, God, if he wasn't there, there'd be 15 players out. So, wow. So no, there is players slowly coming back. Van der Ven, it sounds like, he's getting closer. I'm sure they'll be cautious with him, but he is getting closer. And, Richarlison's just come back. So then Solanke's got injured. So it's a difficult time, but I think, it does feel like that actually that the club want to stick by him. And it's if we go back a few years, Mauricio Pochettino got sacked in 14th place. And obviously done, loads more than Ange, clearly, but you do wonder, is this kind of, we're back to that stage and Levy's this time going to stick with his man and see him through the difficult period rather than kind of getting rid of him. And I do think, I'll put it out there earlier. I do still have faith in Ange, and I do think Spurs are not that far away from having a very good group of players. They just need more players to add to the squad, and they need to keep players fit. And it does feel, 18 months we've done this rebuild. Is that enough time to really make your judgment? Especially when the last 2 months he's had 10 to 9 to 8 players injured every single week. So no, I think he's definitely got the next week. And if he loses to Leicester, then I think it could be right on the wall. But you'd like to hope, God willing, they've lost 7 games in a row. Surely Dr. Tottenham can't come out for that, can it? Who knows?
Well, we discussed off air how Hoffenheim have just picked up a win just before they played Tottenham. So, I mean, you just don't think it's possible. Before Shrini does come back in there, George, I want to ask you, I mean, you've been quite staunch in terms of your feelings about Ange. I know you've been heavily behind him. And again, it's a tricky one because, I mean, we're very blessed to have you cover the football club in such great detail. Many will hear you a lot in those pressers. And I think, again, you ask a lot of the questions that the fans do want to hear. And there's a certain limit to where those questions can go. I'm intrigued to know what you make from a journalist perspective of asking the hard questions at this stage of Ange, because I think when you come to this point of a manager's reign, and we've touched upon it, we've been here before under the likes of Nuno, Mourinho, Conte, where these stories, as you said, just start coming out with regards to 2 games to save your job, 3 games to save your job. How difficult is that going into the presser with the manager where they're clearly under pressure and you've got to answer, you've got to put questions in a certain frame that's going to get you the response you want for writing purposes? I mean, that's a really intriguing thing I'd love to know from your perspective. And is it harder to kind of try and get the information you want out of a manager when they're under this amount of strain and pressure to get results? And I'm sure he's acutely aware of that as well. He's not stupid. He must read the papers. He must know, George, his job is under massive, severe pressure at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, I think he said it after Arsenal, wasn't it? This run is unacceptable, and it is. It absolutely is unacceptable. There is context around it, but it is unacceptable. Spurs, with everything, eighth richest club in the world. It shouldn't be 15th in the table. No way. And I guess what's sort of interesting with Ange is obviously and even now, even though you've not had the Europa League games, you've still had cup games, and you sort of feel like you speak to him almost 5 times out of a 7-day week. So what's new, and often what's new is there's a new player injured, and not a new player coming in. But I think what I've always kind of admired about him is, pretty much you sort of feel like what he's saying is truthful. God, I've been in so many press conferences with managers and the manager down the road at the other North London club, and they'll talk about injuries, and it's like, or talk about transfers, and they just won't give you anything, or they'll just tell you the absolute opposite of what's happening. Whereas with Ange, you do always kind of feel like what he's saying, he's being truthful, and he's been honest. He's always been quite big on integrity, and you do sort of feel that with the way he answers stuff, and he's pretty. Obviously he's narky at times, and he's not very good post-match when Spurs have lost. He did I think last season at Stamford Bridge, he did about 3 minutes. That was very, very short presser. But on one hand, as a journalist, you want more than 3 minutes. But on the other hand, as a fan, you see how much the defeats hurt him. And I think one of the things that I've always, again, part of the reason why I do still have a lot of faith in him is because you can sort of feel. You can feel how proud he is to be Tottenham manager. And we all know that hasn't always been the case for some of his predecessors. And I think, by and large, he doesn't like to talk about referees. He did recently, didn't he, after the Newcastle game, and he's been quite strong on VAR. But God, again, I feel like I've sat through so many Tottenham managers that will just pinpoint the most smallest referee incident in the game, and it becomes the whole talking point. Or they've sort of dragged our club through the mud talking about him. And you don't feel like Ange will do that. I'm sure some fans would like him to come out and put pressure on the board and say, give me some players. But he has kind of done that by being every presser saying he needs help. He's just not done it in a way that some of his other, his predecessors have done. So, no, I think there is, it is obviously a difficult period, and he's getting, a lot of the same questions, and he's been asked about his style as well. That's been a frequent one, and unfortunately he made a big change at Everton, and it didn't pay off. And I've defended him a lot this season, but that one is on him. That was, I didn't see the need for us to go to a back three in that game. And I think that really did cost us, because the first half was largely based on that back three. Although, he's definitely not been helped by some of the senior players. And, I just think of that chance that Sonny had at Everton as well. If that goes in at 1-1, and you'd expect your captain to score that from 8 yards, 10 yards out, maybe it's a different game. But no, I think it's obviously a really, really testing time. And I feel, and you guys are Spurs fans, I can't really remember when it was as difficult as this. And obviously we are 15th in the league, so that says a lot. But at the same time, we're still in 4 cup competitions, and there really is a chance to bloody end this trophy drought. And it feels like the majority of the players are still with him. I think that's a really key thing. You saw towards the end of Conte, you saw towards the end of Mourinho, even a little bit with Poch. You saw that some of the players, maybe a large chunk of the players had lost the faith. And it wouldn't surprise me if a hand, 1 or 2, 3 or 4 maybe aren't, massively in. But I think the majority of them certainly are. And to be in Tottenham's position in the league and to still have the squad behind him shows you there's something about him that people believe in still. He just needs to get some of these bloody 14 players back, because it's not been for a couple of weeks. It's been 2 whole months, even longer really. Before Man City, there was, God knows how many players we had out: Bentancur, Romero, Van der Ven, Odegaard, Richarlison. So even that one we had loads of players out. So it's and I do think that's been a real key part of the last 2 months. I feel like it's hard to judge him on these last 2 months. The Everton one was a bad one, and I do put that on him because he made the formation change that wasn't necessary. But I think a lot of the other defeats, been to Nottingham Forest, to Liverpool, Newcastle, and Arsenal, who are the top 5. So it's not like Spurs have every week been losing to Ipswich and Crystal Palace, which obviously happened earlier in the season. But amongst that, they'd been getting good results. But but no, it's a very difficult time, and he needs to get wins, and he needs to get wins fast.
Yeah, on that, George, we spoke about in your first answer the fact that the board seemingly are backing him, and to your second answer, you said that the he needs help and the players need to come back, or ideally maybe some help coming through the door. It hasn't happened yet. We're on the 22nd of January. We heard in the press conference, obviously, like we said, that it may be unlikely to get anyone in. Does that feel a little bit kind of almost in conflict with each other? The fact that the board seemingly are backing him, which shows more support for this manager than would have been shown under previous managers if the form had been the same, and yet they won't go as far if what has happened so far is going to continue for the next 9 days. Then they're backing him sort of verbally but silently, whereas they won't actually help him out with the players that he needs, which would be a proper sign of support. To me, those things don't really feel like they're consistent. I was wondering if how you feel about that sort of that topic.
Yeah, it doesn't marry up, that, does it? You're saying you're behind the manager, you want to support him, you want to help him through this period, but he's just had a horrible run of really big games at the start of this month, and he's not had any extra players, for those games. I really, really did think, maybe naively, that Spurs would have brought in an outfield player for that Liverpool game. Not maybe to start the Liverpool game, but just to have an extra body. And what was the Liverpool game? January the 8th. And obviously Anthony Kinski come in and did brilliantly, but
yeah,
I think they did just need a body. And I know maybe the recruitment plan, they didn't want to do that. They didn't want to move outside of sticking to the process. But I think the squad just needed a player then, whether it was a forward or whether it was a defender. And it obviously wouldn't have been, maybe it would have been a bit similar to the Timo Werner transfer last January, which on the face of it hasn't worked, obviously. But at the time, it was a body to come in when Sonny was unavailable because of the Asian Cup, and it just gave players in that squad a little bit of respite. So yeah, I am staggered really that Spurs didn't and haven't brought an outfield player in so far, and I almost now I can see a scenario where they won't bring in an outfield player, and I can also understand it a little bit because now you've got players all of a sudden coming back. It was the week where you had Newcastle, Liverpool, Tamworth, admittedly, and then Arsenal and Everton. Those 5 games is when Ange needed another player when he's already without 10. So yeah, I am really surprised that hasn't happened. And obviously, and you guys are bored of hearing this, January is a difficult month to do business. It is, it is. And not many other clubs have signed players. Man City have signed a lot, but Arsenal haven't and Liverpool haven't. Neither of Man United have they, or Chelsea, but it felt like Spurs needed players in the first 2 weeks of the window, and it's hard to really work out why they haven't done that, because they are backing Ange for now, but they haven't in terms of the transfers, and that's let him down on the pitch, because I think. And there is players there because, Ben Godfrey went to Ipswich. Now, Ben Godfrey's not a world beater, but God, if you'd brought him in as a centre-back option who can play either full-back, he would have joined Spurs over Ipswich. I really like what Ipswich do, but he would have joined Spurs over Ipswich if given the choice. So that you could have got that player. Aston Villa.
Do you think the fans would have been okay with? Do you think the fans would have been happy with a signing of Ben Godfrey? I feel like there would have been even more meltdown signing him than there would have been if we signed nobody at all. No disrespect to Godfrey, but I know fans.
Yeah. I don't really think, but I just think Ange needed a body, and I know Ben Godfrey wouldn't have been the answer, but he could have played at Tamworth, and then you give Archie Gray or you give Radu Dragic a rest, and they haven't got to play 120 minutes before then go into Arsenal 3 days later, because that's been part of the problem, really. Spurs have played. Spurs played 15 games in the last 2 months. And unfortunately, every 2 or 3 days, those same players are having to be put out there that they can't get any kind of, rest. They can't really even come off around the 80-minute mark because the games are all so close, and Ange needs his best players out there. And that is why you've seen Yves Bissouma get injured and Pape Sarr get injured and Brennan Johnson get injured, because people are pinning it on Ange. I don't personally agree with that. I think the Van de Ven one you probably could put on him, but those ones are just as a result of him not having options and those guys just needing to play. And then shock horror, they're broken down. But you only need to put in one, maybe two extra bodies, and all of a sudden you could have shuffled a little bit. You've got somebody to come off the bench, and now you've kind of got a few players that are potentially coming back, but unfortunately you've lost a few others in the meanwhile, which I think anyone could have seen happening. But I think Ange's hands were tied there. Really, he's tried to sort of rotate players. Brennan Johnson was rotated quite a bit. Yves Bissouma didn't start against Newcastle, so it's not like these guys have played every single minute. He's tried to sort of rotate them, but he just needed more options, and the club have let him down there, I think.
There'll be an argument, as you know, George, that they've not just let this manager down, they've let many managers down over the course of the last 4 or 5 years in terms of what they've needed. I think, look, I do agree with you what you said there, George, that when you look at what Spurs had to do in this window, I think the damage has already been done to them. In terms of that domestic form and the league table, do I believe that Tottenham brought some players in, to Sean's point, and giving him an opportunity to rest and rotate some players? I don't think Tottenham would be 15th. I really don't. I think there would be, and there would have been an opportunity to just get a little bit further up the league. I think there's a combination there of the two where there have been concerns about him tactically, which I'm sure you're aware about, George, as well. And there's been a concern that a lot of players have been running to the ground because they've not been able to have the freedom and flexibility to rotate players at certain times. I think right now there is a lot of frustration and anger towards the board, where you said it partly in your statement there, George. And sorry, Sean, to be fair, Sean said they're almost silently backing him, but they're not backing him accordingly by what the manager actually needs to get the job into a position where it actually becomes more stable. And I'm talking about on the field as well. I mean, I look at the run of results we've had. I look at the nature of the man that Ange has made it very, very clear before the window had opened, during the window has been open. He's been very consistent. We need help. Dom needs help. And then what happens? You lose Dominic Solanke to a freak incident. I know many fans will find it hard to believe that, given the magnitude of injuries that we've had, it is hard to believe this is all just pure bad luck, and there's something a bit more sinister to that. And I think at the moment there is real frustration and anger towards the very, very top of the club, because we have been here before under the likes of Conte, for example, who we know at the time wanted Bastoni, and for whatever reason that deal didn't come off. He got Clement Longley. There was Jose Mourinho, who was very much keen to have Milan Skriniar through the door. We got Joe Rodon. There was pictures, obviously, at the time of Spurs officials out trying to negotiate Skriniar to come to Tottenham. It never happened. Nuno, I mean, the appointment itself was, I think at the time, one that many fans didn't quite buy into, but you look what he's doing there now. I mean, I heard it said actually earlier on social media, you look at the fact that I think Conte's top of his respective league. You've got Jose Mourinho second in the Turkish league. You've got Nuno third in the Premier League. Can it always just be that these managers are wrong? And yeah, Daniel Levy just seems to be able to hire and fire accordingly without giving the managers the adequate backing. And I think when I look at the business Tottenham have done in the couple of windows under Ange, whilst there was some excitement early on by the fact we got Mickey van der Ven and obviously James Maddison through that door very, very early when he first came in, there has always been that kind of undercurrent of feeling that whilst it's brilliant seeing young players given an opportunity in this recent window, we signed obviously in January the likes of Lucas Bergvall, Archie Gray. We all want to see young players coming through. George, you know, being a fan yourself, that, we all want to see the great young players come through, but there has been that feeling that we are really letting down the more senior established players around the group by not bringing in some more experienced heads to help the likes of Gray and Bergvall develop and grow. And I just, look, don't get me wrong, I think Gray and Bergvall will be better for the experience of what they've gone through. I'm not sure we'll be as fans. I think it might kill us off. I mean, it might be great for the players. I mean, I'm intrigued to know from what you make of it, because again, from a journalist perspective, how much awareness is there, do you think, from Daniel Levy and ENIC of just how much fan frustration there is now around the club at them? You've got the owner's name, the chairman's name being sung on a number of occasions in connection to a song for Kulusevski. That's happening home and away now quite regularly. Definitely away fans are making their feelings known about where they stand with Daniel Levy. Do you not find that staggering? Again, we go back to the point that, you're silently backing Ange Postecoglou, but there's nothing of action to show you that you are backing him if that's the man you actually believe in champion is going to get this right.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of points to pick up with it. I mean, how aware are the board? I mean, they've got ears. That song, I was at Southampton when I felt like that's the first time I'd really heard the song, the Kulusevski song. And and it was loud, and it was repeatedly, and Spurs won 5-0, and they were still singing it. So that definitely got the message across, and it's been sung in pretty much every game since, hasn't it? But I don't, I mean, how much of a difference that's going to make? I mean, ENIC have been looking, and Daniel Levy have been looking for a minority investment for what feels like a long time. I feel like it was this time last year, or maybe the year before, there was talk of sort of Qatari investment, Qatari sort of fund maybe investing, the one that are with PSG, and that sort of, nothing came from that. Spurs did shut that down, to be fair. But he's clearly been looking for minority investment. He hasn't been looking to sell the club. So it's hard to see anything changing from that point of view anytime soon. But in terms of the summer window, I mean, that's another part of why I just feel like you can't pin this on Ange, because obviously Dom Solanke, I think that's a really good signing. And I'm pleased the club finally spent a big chunk of money on a very good player, who's proved to be a really good player. And I think he'll be even better next season, Solanke, when he's sort of fully fitted in. And he's already kind of become a leader during this period, and unfortunately he's now got injured. But the other guys, and as much as I knew Archie Gray was going to be a superstar, and I think we're all sort of seeing the potential of that now, and I think Lucas Bergwijn is a good signing to bring in Timo Werner and Wilson Odobert as the other two. It's just not enough, and it's not enough when you've got a Europa League campaign with 2 extra games, and realistically, obviously Spurs wanted to win that competition at the start of the season. So I'm trying to quickly do the maths off the top of my head. I think that's 16 games if they're going to win it, and they go straight through to the round of 16. So that's 16 games on top of a 38 game season. You can't go in. You can't have a squad of 22. So if you give Ange Archie Gray, and you give him Lucas Bergwijn, and you give him even Wilson Odobert, who's a year older than those two, but not a lot of experience, you can't then expect him to be getting top 4 and to be winning the Europa League and to be going deep in the FA Cup and the Carabao Cup. It's not a big enough squad, especially when you've let go players that I felt they should have let go, but clearly haven't replaced experience-wise in terms of Højbjerg and Emerson Royal and Lo Celso and others. So the summer is completely handicapped Postecoglou. He's got players that are clearly going to be very good, and he probably should have trusted Graham Bergwijn maybe a bit more in the first kind of 2 months of the Premier League season, because they barely got a kick. But Bergwijn probably wasn't ready, in my opinion, at that point. So, and this all just kind of leads into itself, because he hasn't got the players that he wants to bring on in the 60th and the 70th minute. So the guys that like Johnson and Solanke and Kulusevski, they will play longer. And then you get to this point. So like you mentioned earlier, is the injuries bad luck, or is it something sinister? I think, if anything, it's the fact that Ange hasn't got a squad deep enough and strong enough to be able to play the football he wants for 90 minutes. And he has to keep playing the same sort of players. And it's not really a surprise that, I think Spurs must have played, they must have played the most games of any team in the Premier League, other than Arsenal and Liverpool, because they're both also in the Carabao Cup. They've played 33 games, haven't they, in the first half of the season. And it's no wonder they've had so many injuries, because the squad wasn't big enough to handle that. And I think really I think they maybe could have got away with this squad if they didn't sign Wilson Odobert and they signed a more established winger, because then all of a sudden Sonny's minutes are less, and then Solanke can have a little bit of a rest, and Kulusevski can have a rest, Brennan Johnson can have a rest, because you've actually got an established wide forward that's going to put pressure on them, and the minutes can be shared. But the way it's worked out, Odegaard's barely kicked a ball. And he's only 19. You spent 30 million on him. I think that's the one that's really, really cost them, because the other guys all look like they're going to become very good players, and they've already put their hand up. But you just needed an established extra player. And then realistically, you probably needed 2 more players in there, a centre-back and maybe a centre midfielder. But it all kind of leads... obviously Ange is the front of it and the face of it, and he's taking the brunt of the criticism. And Spurs can't be 15th. It just can't be. And people can say that's entitlement, but Tottenham have got enough money, and they've got a big enough stadium and a brilliant training ground to not be 15th. But there's a lot of factors and a lot of context behind it, and I do think he's been let down this window, and he really was let down in that summer window. Even though I think at the time everyone thought it's a pretty good window, and I did think it was a pretty good window, but they definitely needed at least one more, and one more player that was going to affect the first team, not going to be one for the future.
Yeah, I mean, on that point, I know Sean is keen to come back in. Let's bring Shawnee back in on this point.
Yeah, sorry, Ricky, I've just seen your seen the comment in the private chat there. I was sort of daydreaming for a second, listening to George's answer. I guess the follow up to that is about another man who's in the who's been in the news recently, George. I've been on my own channel, I get sort of challenged quite a lot for not being as I guess aggressively aiming my anguish, my irritation towards where we are as a football club solely at the top. I think there's things outside of Tottenham Hotspur that are very much responsible for why not just Tottenham, but many other teams don't win very many trophies anymore. But I've got to be honest, like when it comes to specific areas of their work, then in terms of transfer policy, there's not a lot to necessarily defend Daniel Levy on. And someone else who's come out this week and sort of said something similar is Mido, ex-Tottenham player Mido, who I had a lot of love for him. And usually whenever I hear ex-players or ex-managers write books or talk about the ownership and talk sort of disparagingly about them, I always retort with like, well, let's see where the motivation is. Where's the incentive for them to say what they're saying? People like Hugo Lloris, for example, who a few months ago talked about the watch situation and at the Champions League final and said, oh, you know, the culture at the club isn't a winning mindset. There's not a serious lack of a serious amount of despondency enough for him. And I would challenge him and say, you know, you were the captain of the football club for, I think, the longest time in my lifetime. So isn't that sort of thing down to you rather than the owner? So I always sort of like to kind of challenge what's the message behind the person who's saying it. With Mido, I don't really have a rationale for why he would say anything other than his, you know, honest, sincere feelings. And he has called out the board, saying that, you know, he feels sorry for every Tottenham fan because Daniel Levy et al. Are not doing enough. So just wanted to kind of see where your thoughts were on that player specifically and his words.
Oh, one of Tottenham's players said it, didn't they? Christian Romero said it a month ago.
Yeah.
And that was, you know, that was really eye-opening because, you know, what, you know, you rarely get former players saying it, let alone the current player. Although I think Romero's kind of was really trying to just defend Ange then. Yeah, I mean, when you talk about Daniel Levy, he's obviously done some brilliant things. The stadium's amazing, the training ground's amazing. Does deserve credit for that. When I started supporting Spurs, sort of early 2000s, we were a, you know, lower mid-table club, and since then we've become an established European club. So that was clearly a step in the right direction. But what I do think about quite a lot is that Spurs have the best stadium in the world. They have the best training ground in the world, according to a lot of people. But they're not gonna for that much longer because there's going to be a new stadium built, and the training ground's already 10 years old. So, you know, it won't be that long before there's a new training ground elsewhere that's the best in the world. And unfortunately, in this kind of period, and I kind of I can understand how the sort of, you know, the budget would have been sort of tightened up ahead of the stadium move, because obviously that costs a lot of money. But in the years that have followed, either the money spent has been on poor acquisitions or players not fit for the manager in place, or just, you know, not enough money has been spent. Obviously, the last few years, Spurs have started to spend a bit more, but the big caveat of that is, you know, there was also 100 million brought in thanks to Harry Kane. So, yeah, I mean, it's it was interesting, Mido's comments, and there was another former Spurs player that was saying similar.
Ramon, bless him, Ramon Vega.
That's it.
Ramon.
Yeah, and he's been very vocal against Levy as well.
He's not shy of a word, is he, Ramon? Never shy of a word, Ramon Vega, bless him.
He's not going to get any hospitality tickets anytime soon. But no, but I think, you know, you have to say fair play to people that are coming out and saying what they feel. You know, whether you agree with it or not, they've got that opinion and they're not afraid to say it. And I think it's not. Spurs have definitely started to spend more money the last few years, but the summer window kind of highlights it, doesn't it? That, you know, they've spent money on good players, but I think they needed to spend more. And, you know, the stadium makes so much money from NFL games, from all the concerts, and people. I don't know. I don't really understand why people get annoyed at the club sort of making loads of, or the club doing that sort of stuff, because it brings a lot of money in. What annoys me is that money maybe we don't see filtered out completely into the first team. But
and that is what it is.
I think that is kind of the bottom line, isn't it? You know, 8th richest club, and you're in January, and they've signed a very talented goalkeeper. He's also young, but he actually does look very good in Kinski. But this month they just needed to do something, and I don't think they, Randall Kolo-Muani, they were interested in him, and maybe he just said no because Spurs are 14th and he wants to go Juventus because Turin's a much better place to go for the second half of the season. But it feels like there has been not many, but there has been players that they could have really gone for this January and really, really helped Ange. And it's frustrating they haven't, because, as I've said, he's sort of been left out to dry, and now he's taking the brunt of it. And, understandably, because Spurs' results are not good enough, but he just needed more help. And the club, the board haven't done that this month. And it's, and now it's on them, really, isn't it? Are they going to stick or twist with this? Are they going to see him through this, or are they going to restart the cycle? Because that's also part of why I see things in Ange, but also part of it is, do we really want to go through this cycle again, or where we bring in a new manager, we all get excited, we all think it's the start of something new, and then 18 months later we're back in this situation? Because that's what we've done, haven't we, under Antonio Conte and Jose Mourinho? So no, there's a lot of growing feeling towards the board. To be fair, it feels like it is growing. And there was a protest, wasn't there, before the what game was it? I can't think.
Liverpool game. Yep.
I don't know how that didn't feel like that really took off the ground. But where the club are at the minute, you feel like there's change for Spurs, isn't there? I know that's an account that's kind of fairly active. I imagine they're sort of building towards doing something. But Spurs are 15th, and they haven't signed anyone. Second, 22 days into January. If there's a time for people to get together, it would be now, right?
Can I just quickly ask you, with regards to that kind of the uprising, I guess, the energy that's going towards the board now, if there had been more noise in the media, like there would have been before Johan Lange took over, we spoke about this, I think, on the last show, Ricky, that Paratici is a director of football, is someone that always had 10 plates spinning at the same time, was happy for the noise to get out into the media. Ultimately, you'd only go and pick one of them, but just having that in the zeitgeist that Spurs were busy looking at things, gave people optimism that there was something going to happen. The fact that Johan seems to do it a different way, almost polar opposite, that he likes to keep his cards close to his chest, and that for the most part, the signings that we make don't really have much noise, or if any at all, before they suddenly drop. Do you think that the absence of any kind of any speculation regarding certain players plays into the kind of situation a little bit, whereby had he not been there, had we still been under Paratici, and there was 10 names that were constantly, Tottenham are close on this one, Tottenham are not so close on that one, that would maybe just satiate the fans a bit more, even if you ultimately only get one of them in anyway. But just the fact that there's no noise doubles down on the fact that it doesn't look like we're going to get anyone, and then that adds to the problem for both Levy and for Ange and everybody else, because the fans are not happy.
Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt that Johan Lange likes to sort of work in silence. I mean, the Wilson Odobert story come from absolutely nowhere, and I mean that's kind of unheard of. You always hear a little whisper, of somewhere. With Solanke, that was the case. There was a little noises that come out, and then it went through not long afterwards. But the Odobert one, there was nothing. Kinski, there was nothing. I don't think either was there. I feel like there's another one that was quite. I think Timo Werner was probably the other one that was pretty out of the blue. So yeah, I think if Fabio Paratici was here, he would be spinning the plates, as we've all sort of said, and then the agents of those players would probably that would be sort of feeding its way into the press. The only trouble with that kind of way of doing things is that when you do land on a player, often you can be like, oh well, that player's seems like option C compared to option A, but maybe option A wasn't actually really ever a genuine thing. Spurs were just talking, and it hasn't, they were never really going to sign him, but that's out in the media. So I think that's, from that point of view, I can understand why Spurs would rather work in silence. And hey, look, the hope is that Lange is going to pull another one out of the bag. And I mean, there is still another week of the window, and I think the last week of the window is when you do see one move happens and then it's just like a monopoly effect, and then all the sort of parts fall into place. And there's a lot of big name players that kind of either clubs want to move on or are being chased by big clubs. So who knows? They might be. I'm sure they are working. They obviously are working on things, but I just wonder if it's more they're just trying to stick to their long-term approach. And I mean, Andrew said that himself, that it's important to be disciplined. And I mentioned Ben Godfrey a little bit tongue in cheek, but maybe he's not part of the plan. Maybe I think Kolo Muani, I don't think he would have been part of the plan. I think he would have been a little bit like Werner last season. It's a name that's been put out there. Oh, he could help. Do we get him? And that one hasn't worked out. But they obviously will be working in the background on things. And it'd be brilliant if they could bring someone into the last week to 10 days of the window. But I feel like we've all said, it just feels like it was needed 3 weeks ago. Maybe they'll bring someone in and that guy will score the goals that win Spurs a trophy. But it felt like Ange really needed it during these first 3 weeks.
Yeah, I mean, I know we've touched on it already. It does feel a little bit like damage limitation at the moment. And you mentioned there, George, it was quite interesting. You said, obviously, the fact when ENIC took Spurs over, they were a mid-table side and they have established as a top six side. I mean, they did establish as a top six side. They've no doubt done that. They've took us to the Champions League, don't get me wrong. I know there's obviously a lot of people that can't look at the table at the moment. I made that joke off there. I've said it already on here that I look at that table and just think it's still in alphabetical order. It hasn't really correlated in my mind where Spurs are. And I can't even allow myself to think of that R word at the moment because it's crazy to even think of that. But I mean, it is crazy. I mean, I know Sean has said it a lot on Spurs Talk Show as well, that it feels maybe something is going on behind the scenes there in relation to maybe an investment proposal. But the crazy thing is, you're looking at ENIC overall at Tottenham. They took them over mid-table. They could leave Tottenham mid-table potentially, and they've won one trophy in that period. And, for the legacy of Daniel Levy, if there is a legacy right now, that many maybe feel there isn't one, despite the stadium, despite the training ground, which has gone on behind the scenes, it is absolutely crazy that Spurs are where they are. And I suppose we have to see how it's going to pan out. I mean, you've made it clear from your perspective, George, that as things stand, there is an expectancy they are going to back Ange Postecoglou. More silently, you'd say, more than actively at the moment, given the nature of the market. There has been reports, though, however, in regards to Ange's tactics and maybe behind the scenes, we've seen a few reports where ultimately some are still swearing by the boss. They're behind him. But I mean, you know it, George. You've been around the Tottenham scene for long enough. We've been here under Conte, Mourinho, Nuno, that when you do get these stories around the fact that certain players have complained about the training schedule, the regime, the injury list not going down, the fact that the output needs reducing, how much do you take into account those kind of stories, George? Or is this kind of a lot of the stories that you do hear when a manager is under pressure? Because to be fair, we've heard a very similar rhetoric from the last 3, 4, 5 manager periods where these stories always pop up when a manager is severely under pressure. I suppose, how much credence do you give it, George?
Yeah, no, you do have to give it. It's Sammy Mockbell did that story, didn't he, for the Daily Mail? And Sammy's a really, really good journalist.
Yeah, Sammy's great. He's great.
He's got brilliant contacts. So he's running that story because his contacts are telling him that. And yeah, we have seen this. We've seen this with Conte. We've seen this with Mourinho. Can't remember if we saw it with Poch though, to be fair, but I definitely remember seeing it with Conte and Mourinho, and it it does give you that kind of that sense of inevitability. The only thing I'd say is I feel like with the Mourinho and the Conte ones, it didn't feel like just some of the players were unhappy and not happy with the training. It felt like there was a bigger band of players. And as I kind of said at the top, I'm sure there are some players in this Tottenham squad that are not that happy with Ange. But a lot of them still are, because, I watched the Everton game, and at half time I had that horrible feeling, God, this is going to be horrendous. This is going to be 4, 5, 6, and he's probably going to be sacked on Monday. But they come out, and I know the second half wasn't that much better, but they did fight for him. The players left on the pitch did fight for him. And there's a really good interview with Alistair Gold today with that he's done with Pedro Porro, and Pedro Porro saying he's fully behind the boss and everyone needs to stick together. And actually in there was some very good quotes about the training and the so-called injuries. And I think I think obviously that's a lot of people's frustration is aimed at that at the minute, because we are getting injury after injury, and you sort of want somebody to blame. But the funny thing is, Spurs will hardly be training at the minute because there's so many games. You know, it's you play a game, you have a day off, then you have a light session, then the session before the game isn't that intense because you've got the game the next day. So there's not many training sessions for them to be getting injured in at the minute. But no, it is. You know, Sammy's going back to that story. He's a very good journalist, and there'll definitely be people close to players that will be, you know, speaking to him that are telling that they're not that happy. But in that story, he said that plenty of them do still swear by the boss. And in those Conte and Mourinho stories, I don't feel like that was the case. It was you know, the players are sick and tired of it, that they sort of, you know, they figure change is right, and the change did happen. But it does feel like this time at the minute that Daniel Levy is sticking by Ange, and I think given everything we've just said about the summer window and all the injuries, I think he's right to do that.
Sorry, there, put myself on mute again. George, let's sort of move away from the sort of transfer window speculation. Stick with Ange though, and maybe his eventual departure. Obviously, the rumours, if you're thinking about getting rid of a manager at some point, then you have to start thinking about who's next. And you know, the same names seem to be cropping up quite a lot from around the Premier League. Look at Brentford boss Thomas Frank, who I think we've heard Johan is a big fan of. Obviously, Fulham's Marco Silva's doing some quite nice things over there, and Andoni Iraola as well. I think there's a lot of people that I speak to. They look at him and think that he is, you know, probably the best of the managers that are in the sort of outside the big 4 or 5 teams, I guess, in the Premier League, and doing wonderful things on the South Coast. Obviously, there's also sort of those rumours that came out of Turkey. I think it was the president of Besiktas, or the CEO of Besiktas, I believe, who said that he was thinking about or talking to Edin Terzic, the ex-Borussia Dortmund manager, but that got chalked off their list because he was waiting for or expecting an offer from Tottenham. Haven't really heard too much in the way of other names outside of maybe Pochettino, who is obviously tied to the USA, at least until the end of the World Cup. And it'd probably be very difficult, given that the USA are hosting that and all of the fanfare that they put behind Pochettino, to see him leaving anytime soon. Of those sort of 4 or 5 names, George, like, is there anybody else? Sorry, first of all, what do you think of those names? Is there any likelihood there that they could be the successor? And if not them, anybody else that you might see pop up as a name to consider in the future?
There's someone that I've always kind of, I guess it kind of because I've followed Ipswich a little bit over the last few years, I've always got the sense that Kieran McKenna could be a Tottenham manager one day. Obviously, I don't think it's going to be a very good look if in the summer Ipswich get relegated and he takes over Tottenham. But he's a really, really intelligent coach, and I do honestly think he's going to be one of, you know, he's Northern Irish, so he's not going to be one of English. He's the best English coach. But I think he's going to be one of the best British coaches around. And he's very, very adaptable as well. You know, the Ipswich team that got promoted from League One were sort of all scoring, free-flowing football, and then he went up to Championship and was more pragmatic. And they've done a really good job, Ipswich, to be honest, given the sort of the resources they've got to kind of still have a chance. So I've always wondered one day if he would be a Spurs manager, especially given he started out in the academy and worked his way up and had to retire at a young age and then become one of the coaches. The other guys you mentioned, I mean, Poch is wedded to United States. I can't really, and I also feel that ship might have passed. I mean, I absolutely love Pochettino, but I think the time if Spurs were going to do it was after Conte got sacked. He was out of work and wasn't the Chelsea boss then, and since then he's gone to Chelsea. The other 3 guys you mentioned, I mean, I do really rate Andoni Iraola. He's done a phenomenal job at Bournemouth, and they've also got a load of injuries at the minute, albeit they've only recently had those injuries. They haven't had them for 2 months, but he's doing a brilliant job. And if there is Pochettino vibes there, really, with being at a South Coast club, being a Spanish speaker, and the high intensity way he plays, and what a brilliant job he's doing, sort of improving the younger players at that club. The only kind of real question mark with him that I've heard quite a lot of people that are probably more clued up tactically than me say is that his teams don't have a lot of. He's probably explained this well. His teams aren't very good when they're in the lead. His teams are very good when they're kind of trying to counter-attack and be a transitional team, and they're very good at pressing, but they don't actually like to have the ball that much. And I think that's kind of always been something that's stuck with me, and I can sort of see that in some of the games I've watched. I've watched them beat Man City I did the Man City game down there, and I've seen them a few other times, and they're brilliant kind of on the transition and when another team is dominating a bit more of the ball and they can hit them on the break, but when they're kind of being asked to have the ball a lot, they don't always have the solutions. As you saw recently, they played Everton and really struggled to break Everton down, and eventually did get the win in the end. And the other two guys, I mean, Marcus Silva and Thomas Frank, both very, very good managers. Thomas Frank's been a bit more expansive this season, but I think before that he's been very pragmatic. Probably could say a little bit similar to Marcus Silva. I don't know if they just feel a little bit like Nuno Espirito Santo moves again, where very, very good coaches done a very good job in the Premier League, but can they handle the kind of, I always think it's a little bit cheap to call us a top 6 club and a big club and all that, but can they handle that kind of scrutiny and then the 2 game a week? Because all these guys you mentioned are doing great jobs, but they are playing 1 game a week. And that makes a big difference. It makes a huge difference. And we all underestimated that last season, really. Spurs probably partly come 5th because they played so few games. So all these guys are playing 1 game a week, and you've seen with kind of an Aston Villa and a Newcastle, when they've had to play the extra games in Europe, that's completely knocked them for 6. And these names you mentioned, they're all very good coaches. But they all kind of feel a little bit in the same boat, and Andrew would probably be in the same boat. I'm sure if Andrew's at Bournemouth, he'd be doing a very good job. Maybe he wouldn't be doing as well as Andoni, but I think he would be doing a very good job, and we'd probably be saying the same thing. And it's why it makes you feel like we need to stick at something. And I go back. Obviously the last 2 months have been really, really bad. I mean, Spurs have lost far too many games in that run, especially in the Premier League. But we have also beaten Liverpool in that run. Liverpool have lost 2 games all season. One of them to a Spurs team that had Dragusin and Gray as centre backs, and Jed Spence playing left back. We also beat Man City 4-0 not that long ago, and we also beat Man United. We were also cruising against Man United, and I've never felt more comfortable in my life with 3-0 up. And then our goalkeeper has an absolute nightmare 2 minutes, and all of a sudden we somehow mug our way through that, winning 4-3. But there's been enough moments even during this 2 months to think there is something there. It should have beat Newcastle, to be honest, I feel like, as well. And Newcastle, the form team in the Premier League, and really we deserve to win that game. And that's why I kind of think there's something there. We just need to get through this period and need to help and get the players back. And then then the consistency needs to come, obviously. Because if the start of the season wasn't perfect, I'm not sort of completely wearing blue tinted glasses. The defeats at Ipswich and Crystal Palace were really poor, but there was enough in that, I think, to show that we were moving in the right direction before we got all these injuries.
Do you think though, George? I mean, I'm intrigued to move on to about Sonny and Romero and where we are for Hoffenheim as well. Can you think of any manager though that's gone through this amount of noise now, bar Arteta, that has come out the other side?
I was going to mention that.
But bar Arteta, do you know of anyone else that you could see has come through this amount of noise around their future and got it back on track? Because I'll be honest with you, I'm not sure I have really. I mean, I know Ten Hag, Dharmesh,
Fergie, Sir Alex Ferguson,
Fergie, yeah.
It was a while ago, wasn't it? He
Klopp didn't start fantastically well either, did he?
No.
He struggled in the first year.
I just think, boys, when you get to that stage
I think recently there's not many. I know what you mean.
I just think when you get to that stage where you're at this period now where, I don't mean it in a bad way, George, you're getting these reports now saying he's got 2 games, he's got 3 games, they want to back him. I just feel like, it's like that kind of crisis of confidence that you get, what do you call it, the vote of confidence. That vote of confidence never tends to last more than a certain period of time. I listen, it would be remarkable if he turns it around now, because look, I've said it very clearly. I've got no agenda against Ange Postecoglou. You know, if he's successful, Tottenham are successful. So that's the most important thing to me. You know, all I want is the club to be successful. So I'd love nothing more than Ange to come through this run, get the players back, and we go on to finish the season well and win a cup. And let's see. But I know there's many fans out there that over the course of the last 17, 18 months that haven't seen enough progression on a coaching level perspective. And I think, you know, we look at players that have improved under him. I think Decky's been great. You could argue, though, is that because we've moved him centrally? Again, that's not trying to paint a narrative, but I mean, I feel I'm quite a fair fan, George, when I try and call things. I look at the last 17, 18 months, in my opinion, I haven't seen enough progression of players from a coaching perspective to tell me this is going to work long term. I don't mean in a bad way. Like, even people reference the injuries. Yes, we've got a horrendous injury amount that would most certainly decimate any team. And, you know, Spurs, rightly so, have not picked up results because of their injuries. But I do think at the same time, I think we should be better than where we are at 15th. I think we all probably agree on that. But it does worry me. I think even when we've had the full squad fit, that results haven't always been that great. And you mentioned it there, George. We had some great wins. Don't get me wrong. When it's worked, it's been superb. You know, again, I'll make your point. United away was brilliant. City away was great. Liverpool at home, again, maybe a different change of style from Ange. It worked. We got the win. My worry is that we've not seen enough of that in the last 17, 18 months. Do you think, is that a fair point for me to say there, George?
No, that is fair. But that is also a rebuild. You know, we can't. Do you think fans aren't
patient? I know you'll never speak for fans. Do you think that's a problem because we're so impatient as fans? We've waited so long for a trophy. Do you think despite the decimation of injuries, what we're going through is a rebuild? Do you think this does need to be given more time and more legs? We shouldn't be having discussions about other managers potentially. Is that wrong?
No, I mean, look, I can't say people need to be more patient because we've waited 17 years to win a bloody trophy, and we all felt we were really close under Poch, and I think that's made it worse because we all felt, you know, next year we're a little bit like Arsenal. Next year will be next year, and then it all come tumbling down. And when you're 15th in the table, it obviously it feels like a crisis. But I just kind of think that the first season was up and down, and it was always going to be. But something. The day before the start of the season, we sold Harry Kane. Now you put Harry Kane in this team, and Harry Kane has, you know, I think he's actually changed a little bit the last few years. He's not the same player he was, still a brilliant player. But, you know, Conte had Harry Kane, Jose had Harry Kane. And you know what, if you know, I know that the last 2 months obviously been terrible. If you actually go back to the Man City win, Ange's got a better win rate than Conte and Mourinho. He's got like he's got a 54% win rate overall, all games. And Conte and Mourinho are 53 and 51. The last 2 months obviously drop it down. I don't know what it is now. It's under 50.
I can show you it, George. Yeah, you're pretty. I mean, that is pretty. At the moment, he's averaging.
But that's just the league, though, Rick, isn't it? That's the league.
That is the league.
And this is the thing. We've won. I think we've won 15 of 33 overall this season. I think we've lost 13, so that's too many defeats. But we have won half our games in all competitions, and we can't all say that we want to win a trophy and then just discount the fact that Ange's won games in the cup, because that's all we all be on. We're probably, if you said to every single 60,000 fan in the stadium at the start of the season, Spurs will come 11th, but they'll win the Europa League, I honestly think every single one of them would have said yes.
Yeah, I think many would have sacrificed a league position to win a cup. I think
on paper, Ricky, on paper. Until I've had this debate 1,000 times.
Until you're in it.
I've always said that finishing fourth, I believe, is harder than winning a trophy, because you can't avoid the big teams. You have to play them twice. There's no you get the
38 games as well.
38 games, and with the cups now, this can swing both ways. Obviously, Tottenham in the Carabao Cup this year, they've had the hardest draw you could possibly have. If Tottenham do go on to win the Carabao Cup, I would imagine that there's been no harder pathway to lifting a trophy than that particular one has ever been lifted. I think that it's crazy. Yeah. But in a different year, I did a show about this on my channel a couple of weeks ago. I analysed 75 years trophy success in the English football system. And like 90% of the top of trophies in the last 25 years under Levy's tenure have been won by 5 teams. But if you go all the way back to the 40s and the 50s and come forward, there's some very clear themes that successful teams that have had more than just periodic success, but kind of sort of long grain success, they all have. It's not just money in football that's a problem outside of the football club itself. It's the lack of like a figurehead. Every team that's been successful has had either a manager or someone at the football club that has been like an ever-present part of that period of time. And these days, it just doesn't happen anymore. And so one of the things we talk about Ange Postecoglou is has he had enough time? Has he not? You look at the other teams that always were successful, like Tottenham used to be, like Villa, Newcastle, Derby, West Brom, Wolves, all of those teams back in the day. Those teams haven't won anything since either. There's very few teams that win anything anymore. And those other 5 teams, like the Swanseas and the Middlesbrough and the Portsmouths, those teams that have won periodic success since Daniel Levy came in, they all have had very easy draws to get to the success that they had, that momentary success, and they've all gone down since. They've all been relegated ever since, including Leicester. So I just think that there's the argument that if Tottenham are looking for success and that until now top 4 isn't a trophy, is what we're always told, then if you want that to happen, there's 2 things you should really do. One is respect Ange for getting us to a semi-final despite all of the injuries, and 2 is if you're going to do another rebuild now, then you're going to start again. And one of the common themes of all the teams that aren't successful is that you have an average managerial tenure of about 18 months. And so I think that sometimes you have to stick with it, get through the rough patch. Maybe Ange isn't the guy, but you won't know until you know.
Yeah, I mean, the thing I would say is that, maybe Ange isn't the guy. None of us know. I think he can do. I think he can lead us. I'm not saying he's going to win us the Premier League, but I think he can lead us to a really exciting era. But what he has done, regardless, is when he took over, we was all bored to our tears.
Yep.
So he reinvigorated the football club. That was the first big tick he did.
Yep.
After losing Harry Kane, because God, this could have been last season easily. We didn't even have Solanke last season.
You're
we
right.
had Richarlison, who was fit for like half the season. So where I kind of look at him and think, so we got through that first season post Harry Kane. We've now got some brilliant young players, which I know it's frustrating because we've only got the young players and we needed more ready-made players, but we do have a real core of some exciting young players like Mikey Moore. God, I know he's a 17-year-old, but if he'd been fit for the last 2 months, he would have made an impact. I'm not saying Spurs would be, 7th, but he would have made an impact and, given Sonny a bit of a kick up the backside as well. And yeah, there's definitely things Ange needs to get better at. I mean, one of the big things is, and I'd like to think if he does stay that he'd know this. He needs to trust some more of those squad players, because Jed Spence took a long time to get his opportunity, and as I said earlier, he didn't play Archie Gray or Luke Bergwijn in the league, early enough, in my opinion, and clearly against kind of low blocks. We saw that against Tamworth. This team struggles, but that is kind of a common problem throughout football. Trying to break down a low block is one of the hardest things, and Arsenal's kind of way of doing it is now set pieces. But there's plenty of things Ange can improve on. But I just think, can we really judge him when he's been in charge for, how many games? I've got it written down somewhere. He's been in charge for 74 matches, but the last kind of, probably about 30 of those matches, he's had half the team out injured, because you think, like, even last season we had kind of, after the Chelsea game, which was the start of November, all the way through to like the end of January, we had loads of injuries again. It just doesn't feel like, to me, I know 15th in the table is terrible, but it feels like we need to see this through to the end of the season, see where we are when he gets all the players back. If the consistency is not there, then fair enough. Yeah. But there is kind of, we have got some players there, and not all of them, because there's a lot of players that I think have sort of let him down the last couple of months. But I sort of think, Kulusevski's really stepped forward as a leader. I think Solanke's a very good player. When you've got Romero and Van de Ven there's a real kind of solidness to us that we've obviously lacked. And there's plenty of others, I don't know if Pedro Porro is knackered now, but I actually felt he'd really improved up until about a month ago, and he's now been running to the ground. But there is sort of the nucleus of a good team there. But at the minute, when you've got 10 players out injured and you've lost 5 of your last 8, it doesn't feel like it, and I get that. But we're still in the cups, and we all want a cup, so we've still got a chance of having a special season.
I do agree, George. I think it's a really difficult debate because, I mean, you probably see it as when we're on the show, we have like a live chat, and I think the chat is very much split and divided about what everybody wants. I think the issue that some maybe have is that when we did have all the players fit and available to us in the second half of last season, form wasn't that great, and I think that does play on people's minds. And I think, again, you kind of brought it up, George, that you talk about they're trying to be patient. I think the problem is now, we live in a world, and I think football's become that, where people have become very impatient. And I think when we've got our wonderful dear supporters spending what the highest season ticket price is in the country, and they're having to witness and see Spurs engulfed in some of the games that they're having to play in and be 15th in the league, which again, they've had a decimation of injuries, is not easy. Don't get me wrong. I think that is where a lot of the fan frustration comes from. And I think the fact is, when you're being asked to pay those highest season ticket prices in the country and you're seeing the calibre of players coming through, don't get me wrong, I think everyone was happy to see Dominic Solanke come through. I think he's been great, Dom. I think where I feel sorry for Dom is that he's not had the support around him to be able to help him, because that's, I think everyone's concern was, before those stories broke on the Saturday night, it was almost thinking, if there's one player you do not want to lose in the run that you're in, you don't want it to be Dom. And we lost Dom, and I think it's tricky right now. It's tricky as a fan, and then you want to maybe get a lift and think they could bring some players in to help them. And then we're hearing from Ange that they want to bring anybody in. You can understand why fans go into overdrive right now, and there's a frustration. But look, we're going to veer away from Ange. We are going to fit in very quickly an audio break. We have got nearly over 7,000 of you watching the show live. Thanks so much, as always, for the incredible support for Last Word on Spurs. I have to say a huge thank you for the tremendous support we do get for the show, because we do appreciate that the topics that we're discussing very much will split the fan base, and there'll be some that are very much in awe of what some are saying. There may be much that are in disagreement with what some are saying. That's the beauty of the show. I think George said it there, that all we want is a trophy for some. And all we want to do is see the club successful. And I think the key is that everybody has got their own take, their own view of how the club should be successful. And I've always said this, everyone's opinion isn't wrong. We've just got different opinions of how we approach it. So we shall see. We're going to turn our attention to some of the players and where we are with them. And then we're going to close on where we are for Hoffenheim on Thursday, which is a big game for this football club in Europe. I'm going to hand back over to Shawnee, who's going to kickstart the second half. I must just say, Sean over at the Spurs Talk Show, Sean's got some wonderful content over there. Please go and check him out. And obviously, Jules Sessions from PA, Tottenham Hotspur correspondent. Yes, it is that man that you do hear asking Ange the questions and trying to get us the answers that we all seek. And it isn't his fault, to be very, very clear, that we don't get the answers that we want. We can't force Ange or make Ange say things he can't give us, although we want him to. I know George can't force him into buying any players. Can you, George? Just to be clear, you can't.
I wish. I'd tell him to... who would I tell him to buy? Maybe Garnacho. I quite like Garnacho. I'd go for him.
There's a lot of love for you, George. I think people really apprate a lot of the balance.
I'm surprised. I thought all the Ange out would be after me, but it's fine.
I think there's a realization out there that for any manager right now, it would be very, very tough with the injury decimation. And then on top of that, a manager coming out that said many times, I need support and I need help, and hasn't got that support. I think I've said it a lot on this show. Ange Postecoglou, for me, is maybe part of the problem. He's certainly not all of the problem. He certainly isn't. Let me hand over to Sean so we can kickstart this next part of Last One Spurs. Shawnee, I'll hand back over to you.
Yeah, George, in the last segment, we were just talking a little bit about the, how long should a manager be given, and, sort of legacy, longer term, usually brings you success. A player we've got to talk about now is, of course, Heung-Min's son, who has been one of the longest servants ever, I think, as a Tottenham Hotspur player, obviously captain of the club, got his 1-year extension very recently, but there are rumours percolating around that he actually wanted to negotiate a fresh, longer-term deal than just the 1-year option that was taken up by the club. First of all, sort of, do you have any insight on that, whether that's true or not? And more importantly, what can you make from that? Given that one of the things that I think Daniel Levy we can all agree on is that he is obviously always thinking about the bottom line, thinking about how to get those revenue numbers up. And if there was intention from the player to sign a longer-term deal, despite obviously his form struggling a little bit right now, if he was to sign a 2 or 3 year deal with Tottenham to see out his career, clearly that would bring in a healthy amount of revenue from certain parts of the world as a continued kind of sort of, I'd say cash cow. It seems disrespectful, but the kind of the reality is that there's a massive amount of following for the man. So, given that if it's true that he wanted to sign, why do you think that Tottenham only took up the 1 year? And it's a bit atypical of Daniel Levy, would you say?
If I've got any fans at the minute, I think they probably will turn off now because I've been so disappointed with Sonny. I really have the last 2 months. I think he definitely wanted a longer contract, and I can understand why he would, because without a shadow of a doubt, he's been an absolute Spurs great. I remember having like a chat with someone about what would be more painful, Harry Kane leaving or Sonny leaving, because he's been an absolute legend, hasn't he? Why has he only got 1 year deal? I think he's in decline. I really do. And to be honest, the numbers back that up. This season he's got 8 goals, hasn't he? But he's only got 5 goals in the last 3 months. One of them was a penalty. One of them was a corner kick, which he wasn't trying to score that. I think in this time when Ange has obviously been under the pump with players injured, I think he really needed Sonny to step up. And I think he really needed Maddison to step up as well. And they're 2 guys I've been really disappointed with. And I did always kind of feel when Ange threw Werner under the bus, which felt very out of character for him and a little bit out of order. I did always feel that was aimed, and this is just my personal opinion, I felt that was aimed at Sonny and Maddison, because they weren't putting up trees at all then. Son had just been on the bench at Bournemouth. I think so had Maddison, and they both come on and didn't do anything. They've both been, actually Maddison had then come on against Chelsea and he set up Son, but again, neither of them felt like they were really kind of rolling their sleeves up and helping this team and leading this young team through. And then after that, they obviously had both of them done very well against Southampton. But yeah, I just think Sonny, I can understand why obviously he would want a 3-year deal. Mo Salah wants a 3-year deal at Liverpool. It doesn't look like he's going to get it. And Mo Salah's, it's very, I know one's in a very good team at the minute and one's in a team that's struggling for form, but the comparison is there to make. Mo Salah's having a brilliant season, and he's actually played 700 more minutes than Sonny. Sonny has played more minutes this season than he's needed to, but Ange has tried to rotate him. Ange tried to protect him against Aston Villa. He'd just come back from the hamstring injury. He got subbed after about 55 minutes against Aston Villa, and he's throwing a hissy fit walking off the pitch. That was when I kind of started to question him a little bit, because you're the captain and you've just come back from an injury, and Ange's trying to protect him, which people don't talk about because Ange obviously makes all the injuries. But he was trying to protect him and taking him off and recover and sort of look after his body. And you got Sonny kind of throwing a hissy fit there. And when you look at Sonny's stats from the last 3 seasons, the 2022-23 season, he obviously had the sports hernia.
Yeah.
But even then, he only, the first half of the season, he scored 5 goals. That was a hat-trick against Leicester and 2 against someone else before the World Cup. So he scored 5 goals in the first half of the season. Last season, it felt like, we've got our Sonny back. He had a brilliant start to the season. But again, the second half of the season, he sort of went missing. I think, again, he only scored 5 goals when he come back from the Asia Cup. So, and this first half of the season is kind of a similar story. So you look at the last 3 seasons and he's had a big drop-off at one half of the season. He's 32 now. He's Spurs' highest earner. I don't think he deserves a 3-year deal if we're purely basing this on a business point of view. He's been an absolute great for Spurs.
He must bring in He must bring in a lot more money than he costs, though, in terms of additional revenue to the football club in third parties, in marketing, in terms of the sponsors, in terms of obviously the shirt sales and things. That they might, in terms of is he a cost center or a profit center? Surely his salary must be covered every week, right?
I totally agree.
100%. But does that help Ange? That
No,
doesn't help Ange.
No, but Daniel Levy,
So, like,
it's a difficult thing for Daniel, like people that criticize Daniel Levy for always thinking about the bottom line rather than thinking about what's best for the club. If he's only giving him a 1-year deal because he and the coaching staff think that Sonny's on the decline, which I think we can all agree on he is, then is this evidence that Daniel Levy doesn't always think about the bottom line because he is sacrificing however many more millions over the next 3 years by only giving him 1 year and then letting him sail off on the sunset for free? And he might even be sold this summer for all we know. Like he might go for to somewhere for like £20 million, but surely that's a big dent in Tottenham's revenue streams for next year if that's the case.
Yeah, I think it's absolutely true. Sonny's an absolute global icon. He's kind of as big as David Beckham when it comes to that side of the world.
Right.
But I just think from the footballing point of view, his numbers are declining. And if he's not going to be happy being managed, which the evidence with my eyes suggests that with the way he looks coming off the pitch when he does get substituted, then how can you keep him for longer than a year if he thinks he's sort of too good to be coming off in games or to be coming on in games? And I just kind of go back to it. I just think this sort of 2-month period, Ange has really needed his leaders, and Sonny and Maddison are the two part of the leadership team. Romero's been injured for 2 months, so we can let him off. But he's needed his leaders, and those two guys, I don't think, Maddison's got really good numbers this season, but just too many times in terms of the eye test, I just feel like when Spurs need someone to take the game by the scruff of the neck, it's Dejan Kulusevski that does it. It's on the odd occasion it's been Maddison, and he was obviously brilliant at Man City. He was brilliant at Southampton, but just too many times for me, those two guys in the last 2 months have not stepped up.
Can I ask you
that's
very quickly on Maddison? I've got to ask you quickly on Maddison because I've got to say, such an intriguing conversation. Many are really enjoying the chat. And sometimes when you don't have, I only get vilified for saying this now. Sometimes when you haven't got a million transfer names to throw out there, you do get really good conversations like the one we're having here. I'm conscious we've got to squeeze in Hoffenheim as well. But just on James Maddison, there is a feeling for some fans out there that there seems to be quite a bizarre relationship with him and Ange. There's a situation where he's being hauled off in games where Spurs are chasing a goal to equalise or chasing a goal to win it. I mean, the guy came in and was immediately given the vice captaincy, and yet there has been a number of occasions, which I'm sure George are aware of as well, that he's doesn't take well to being substituted as well. Maybe similar to Sonny at times, where he's quite sulky on the touchline. I think one we saw was it West Ham where he brought him off, and to be fair to Ange, we changed the game around, we won the game. And what I didn't like is, I know many picked up on this, that, and Johnny actually references quite a lot, Johnny, as well, that in that game, Spurs went on to win it, and Maddison just sat there on the bench. Spurs won the game, we scored 3 goals. Maddison didn't get up to applaud that. I just find that really distasteful when you're the vice captain of the football club, and your duty, in my opinion, is to be about the team. It's about the team. And whilst I agree with you, George, he's had really good numbers, Maddison, in terms of when you look at the game ratio to starting. I've been very frustrated with his performances in games where things are going against us and you need somebody to dig in and ride us out of games to get us back into it. I just don't think I've seen that enough from James Maddison. Kulusevski, to be fair to Decky, I feel Decky has been probably the most consistent Spurs player this season, but I think the squad really, really lacks, George, what you've touched upon there, is leadership massively. I look at this team that when we go a goal down, when we go behind, I just don't see enough leaders in that camp that are either going to claw the game back our way, dig in for 15, 20 minutes when things are tight, just use a little bit of the dark arts. I mean, Ange doesn't like the dark arts, which I just think every manager should be attuned to a little bit because, there's times you've got to be a bit streetwise in certain games and use a bit of football logic, when to waste a bit of time, when to give players a rest, when you can see things are going against you, when to have the word with your teammate. I haven't seen that enough with his Tottenham side under Ange. And that's not all on Ange because, he's not responsible, I think, for a certain degree of the players he wants. I think Ange has actually spoken about the fact that he does mention the fact there's been the age profile of the squad, maybe not enough leaders. And that's where I do feel for Ange a lot. I think he's been let down massively by not having some leaders around the squad, which, very quickly on Maddison, what do you take on that view? Do you feel the relationship with him and Ange is great, or can you see it looks strained a little bit at times?
I mean, it's hard to say for sure, but I mean, I could certainly see a world where in the summer, Maddison, if there was a good offer for him, that I think he could be sold. I just don't know if he's dynamic enough and maybe selfless enough. Maybe that's a little bit harsh for this system. Andrew's always said, he said this from the outset, that his kind of, his philosophy and his kind of structure and his way of playing football works when everyone works for each other. It's not about somebody being the main man and scoring the goals. And it did feel a little bit like Maddison was the main man at the start of last season, and he was taking a lot of the adulation. Him and Sonny were sort of this kind of figurehead for. And then after that, he got his injury, and ever since, I've just kind of always had this nagging feeling that he doesn't really fit into this team quite as well as maybe he thought he would, or he thought he did at the start of that period. And there's been countless games, hasn't there, where he's been on, what was it? He was on the bench against Wolves. He was on the bench against Arsenal. There's definitely another game recently.
You have to go all the way back to Manchester City, right, to see the last time he put in a shift where he actually fought and worked hard off the ball. And this system needs, this system requires, in the way I interpret it, your front men. If you're going to do the high line and the high press, you need everybody. I always say workhorses, not show ponies. And unfortunately, if you pick a front four that looks a little bit like Sonny, Maddison, Brennan Johnson, and Timo Werner, you don't have anyone in that four that's going to work hard off the ball, which is what I think where Decky and Solanke have been so good. But Decky's obviously got a lot of the plaudits. Solanke flies under the radar. But Maddison, for me, too much of a show pony with too many others doing that same sort of vibe around them. Not enough output. But if you're not going to do it on the ball, then you have to do it off. And neither of him and a few others don't do it. And that's where the problems and the transitions in play, in my opinion, start from. Yeah,
I just don't think he's been consistent enough for me. He's had some brilliant performances. That Man City was fantastic. Start of the season at Brentford, against Brentford, I remember having a brilliant game. I think he was really good at Old Trafford as well. So he's not been poor this season. Don't get me wrong, but I just think Spurs have needed more from him. And in this period, when the results haven't been good, but we've seen Solanke really step up and kind of be a leader, and then we've seen Kulusevski really step up. We've seen Archie Gray and Lucas Bergvall kind of step up and be leaders. I don't feel like Sonny and Maddison have sort of done that, and it does make me question. I wouldn't say that they don't buy into Ange, but it just does make me question long term. Are they going to be the guys? Lots of the big clubs. Liverpool sold Coutinho. Everyone thought it was bananas, and that ended up being the kind of the sort of sliding doors moment. Arsenal got rid of Aubameyang and Lacazette. Right, they haven't won anything, but they've gone to that level where they're a consistent challenger for the league. So in these kind of moments, in these kind of rebuilding periods, sure, there's probably one at City. City got rid of Aguero. There's always a real big statement kind of player that leaves the project that no one thinks is going to leave the project, and he does, and it ends up paying off. And I just wonder if maybe that could be Maddison. I might be wrong. He might have a brilliant second half of the season, and I'm sure with Leicester on Sunday, he's probably going to be. Hopefully, he pings in a couple of free kicks. But I feel like he needs to. I feel like Ange needs him and Sonny to step up in this period. More than they have. They've done it a handful of times, but they've needed to do it more, like Kulusevski and Solanke have, in my opinion.
Can agree. Yeah,
for me, just last word on that before we move into the final player, before the final transition into Hoffenheim, George. For you, I would just say, I think that with both of those sorts of players, it's not just about everyone can excuse poor form. It's the self-reflection. If you're not playing, you clearly aren't doing very well. There's a reason for it. If you can't get the minutes despite all of the injuries, and then you're sulking, it's almost like you're not paying attention to your own performances, and that, like I say, it can look very individualistic and not about the team, which, as you said quite correctly, George, this system it requires more selflessness and more of a team effort. So hopefully we'll see some more from them. One player I don't think you can necessarily throw under the bus for any of the same reasons, though, is Christian Romero. Although, to be honest, I have in the past had question marks around his availability just before Argentina games and things like that. But he's obviously had a long spate of injuries, quite a frequent set of injuries over the last couple of years. But there is still a lot of love for the player, and he's obviously a very, very top defender in the Premier League. Argentinian World Cup winner, and with that sort of accolade comes some rumours that he might be of interest to teams like, I guess, Real Madrid who are coming sniffing. And if Real Madrid are a team that comes knocking on the door, most players, especially ones that speak Spanish as their mother tongue, would probably open it. Do you have any insights there, George, on whether you believe that Christian Romero is fully coys, or would the temptation of going to Madrid be too strong of a draw for him in the summer?
I think Real Madrid were sniffing around him last summer, actually, and Spurs very kind of quickly shut the door on that. I can't remember. I've got a feeling there was kind of like 100 million quoted. I can't remember. That's kind of in my subconsciousness. I can't think of like who had said that to me, or if I'd read that somewhere. But I think something that is very noticeable with Cuti Romero is he is very much Ange in. He really, really has bought into Ange. And I think, there's probably a world where he could have left that summer after Conte left, because he seemed really disillusioned with the way things were going under Conte and where we were as a club. He would have been at Spurs 2 years by then, I think, at that point. It was just after he'd won the World Cup. And he seems to have really, really bought into Ange. And I think, I was there at the training ground today, and the media for the Europa League games are allowed to film 15 minutes of the first 15 minutes of training, and Ange was standing there on the sidelines. All the players had come out, and Ange was still sort of looking in the direction of where the players come from, sort of smiling and laughing. And then Cuti runs out and he gives him a big high five. And I think it does feel like there's a genuine kind of affection between those two. And while I talk about kind of Sonny and Maddison maybe not being, showing good leadership lately, and I don't think Christian Romero is necessarily a leader in terms of what he says, but I think on the pitch he does show that leadership. I don't actually think he's had the best season. I think he'd been at fault for a few goals actually before he did get injured. But
yeah, early on he was. Yep.
But I tell you where we miss Romero loads is his ability to pass out from the back.
Yeah.
And it's such an underrated quality of his.
Yep.
And the one I always think about,
best in the league, in my opinion, for that.
Yeah, the Liverpool
100%.
game last season when we won in the last minute, I was thinking about him getting the ball about 22 yards out. Literally, the whole Liverpool team is there. There's 11 players. 9 players because they're down to 9 men. And there's nowhere. Most players in that situation, 96th minute, would just have a shot because you're not thinking clear-headed. He controls it, draws the player out, which he does so well. Passes out to Pedro Porro, and he whips it in, and because he's in space, and we get the winner. And I think that's really, bizarrely, obviously Spurs haven't defended very well the last 2 months. But bizarrely, where I think actually what's let us down at times is we've just not been able to keep the ball well enough and to sort of break through the lines. And he sort of baits the press so well. He draws the opponent out when they come at him. He's so calm on the ball that he can pass through. And I think when he does come back, which Ange said he'll be a 7 to 10 days in his press conference, but I sort of wonder if he would have a chance for Leicester. I do think it's going to make our play in general. I think it'll make us obviously better defensively, but I think it'll make our play in general on the ball and our attacking actually better because he's just so good on the ball, and it's such an underrated kind of facet of his play. And look, I think he's going to have 2 years left, isn't he? In the summer, I think he's got a deal till 2027. I'd imagine Real Madrid will come sniff it again, although I guess it depends a little bit on who their manager is. I kind of feel like his future is a little bit wedded to Ange. I kind of think if Ange does steer us through this and he's still there in the summer, I think Ange probably could convince him to stay another year and kind of see this project through to maybe it's kind of the next step.
That's despite George what he said about the board. Despite that, what he said about the ownership.
Yeah, well, I think obviously he criticised the ball, but I think what he was really trying to do then was defend Ange. I think that was his aim wasn't to criticise the board. I think his aim was to kind of defend Ange and say we need to stick with this guy. He's not been given enough players. So I do think
typical Romero, right? Goes in 2-footed. He means one thing, gets something else.
Absolutely.
Clear them all out. Just clear them all out.
God, if he comes back and gets sent off, Jesus help us all. But
Another
he's been
3
quite
games
good
out.
under
That'd be
Ange.
so typical
He's-
Tottenham, wouldn't it? Another one out for 3 games.
Yeah, under Ange, he's been pretty good discipline-wise. But no, I do think there will definitely be interest in the summer. I think what might help Spurs is the fact that it's a World Cup year. You see a lot of these big moves after a World Cup. Some players don't want to move before a World Cup because it's kind of going to a new club and a new environment, and you want to have a good, solid, steady season before obviously the kind of pinnacle of your career. So I wonder if that might also help Spurs. But I do honestly think it is a little bit tied to Ange. He seems so sort of strongly behind Ange, as do a decent chunk of the players. I still think. Mentioned that Pedro Porro interview with Alistair Gold, sort of saying he's fully behind him. So
Yeah.
I think it's obviously one to keep an eye on with Christian Romero. And I guess whatever happens in the summer with him, Spurs clearly need to bring in another centre back, another quality centre back. Ben Davies is gonna stick around, and I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing if he's kind of 5th choice. You might have Luka Vuskovic, that kind of is part of that little group, but he's going to be a young guy that's not going to be expected to play too many minutes. It's probably a question mark over Dragusin, but I think you do need to kind of bring in another centre back in the summer, regardless of what happens with Romero, just because we've seen that, really Ange needs almost 2 players for every position if he wants to kind of play the style he does. And that's something he did at Celtic. I know you shouldn't really compare the Scottish League to the Premier League, but at Celtic, his kind of massive trait was on the 60-minute mark, 65 minutes. He'd make 5 subs at times, and he would bring the new, the sort of substitutes on, and it would be kind of, all of a sudden you'd get 90 minutes of Ange ball, because he's able to bring those players on that are good enough, first of all, and are also kind of ready to play his football. So I think Spurs definitely will need to get another centre back in the summer. But yeah, I really would like Christian Romero to stay. And when Spurs generally win things, we normally have an Argentinian. So hopefully he can follow in Ozzy and Ricky's footsteps.
Hopefully, George, it's a good omen. I've got to say, it's been a fabulous show so far. I could talk to you for hours, George. I know we're probably looking over our shoulder thinking, right, are the kids all right? Are we going to get away with this?
Mine's not wet the bed yet, so I'm all right.
All right, we're an hour and a half in. I'm wondering mine might be due that at some point. George, if you've got time, we'll have to squeeze in a quick 5-10 on Hoffenheim. Is that okay with yourself?
Yeah, it's all good. Yeah,
you're a superstar. Been a fabulous show. I've got to say again, a reminder, guys, that we've got over nearly 7,000-8,000 of you that are watching the show live. Thank you so much. I'm joined by people are loving this duo, the co-host, the link up here, me and the wonderful Sean Butler at the Spurs Talk Show. Sean got loads of content over there. Please go and check out Sean's content over at the Spurs Talk Show. Wonderful stuff around the ownership and what's happening there, and also around kind of, I was going to say transfers, but I'm not sure if Sean will be a lot on the ground at the moment with regards to that. I know everyone sees Sean a lot in the parks. I mean, Sean, we might get you doing laps in there till we get some players.
Honestly, Ricky, people have been asking me, Sean, are you okay? Is everything okay? We haven't seen you for 5 days. Oh, it's January, but there's nothing to talk about, so I'm just gonna take some time off.
I know people actually. I mean, so many people say to me, "This is genuine therapy, Rick, that you're finding us with now." So look, we do appreciate all the love for the show. We really, really do, and look, we do also appreciate it's tough times right now. And I'd said it, during the show and midway through the show. Not everybody's going to agree with everything we're saying right now, and that is just the nature of where Spurs are. It's going to really conflict opinions on the manager, on the ownership, on certain players. But I think I always come away better when you've had these conversations that you've talked it out. And the problem is, what you end up the next day is, even some more bad news. You've got to then talk that out. It is non-stop at the moment. I will just say, I mean, it is difficult times as Spurs fans. We're joined by a wonderful dual sessions. Tottenham's correspondent for the PA media. A reminder, it is that man you are hearing in those pressers asking Ange the questions that we want to get the answers to, even though sometimes Ange might not like the questions, as we've touched upon. And maybe when he is very downbeat, George, as we know, after defeats, it can be quite hard to decipher what he's actually saying, because there are times where he does almost talk to the floor, where he's so despondent. I do wonder how he then picks himself back up the next day when he looks so low. But yeah, listen, we're going to come on to Hoffenheim and how big that game is for Tottenham. A reminder, look, really all obviously watching the show live, please feel free to hit like, hit subscribe. Let's try and get this out to a big wide Spurs audience as possible. In terms of this Hoffenheim game and where we stand for it, we've touched upon the fact of, George was very, obviously, gave us an update on Romero. He was at the training ground earlier in the day in which Romero has returned to first team training. We do understand, however, that from Ange confirming that it's going to be too early to see him make his return, but he is back in training. Ange did confirm that as things stand at the moment, that Sarr did try to train, but he was in a form of discomfort. So Sarr, unfortunately, won't be available for this one. So we'll see what he's like for the weekend. Obviously, we know Jed Spence, Sergio Reguilon are ineligible for the game, in which obviously that presser he did confirm the club are working hard in the market, but there's nothing imminent. And there is a possibility that Spurs might sign nobody else between now and the end of the window. He was asked if he can confirm who starts at left back. Will it be Archie or Ben? He said it'll probably be one of those two. That's all we've got. In terms of kind of eye-catching points from the press conference, really, it's the fact that, again, And was asked if the players at any point taken their eye off the ball and were prioritising the cup, and said, no, mate, the players are giving everything they've got. There's been a good, solid 2 months of us relying on a very small group of players. We're in every competition, which is a great thing. It does take its toll, but the players are giving utmost everything in every game. We are still in all 3 cup competitions. There's a fantastic opportunity there for us in the next couple of months to hopefully go on and push on in those respective cups. And look, I think there was a joke in that presser. I don't know if you saw it, George, where there was a moment where even the translator nearly got an injury. And I thought, Anne should just stay away from me, because I'm clearly a bad feeling around me where maybe I'm causing all these injuries. I mean, just as an insight, George, very quickly, I know we're going to come on to Hoffenheim. What have you made of Andy's pressers recently? You've been in quite a few of them. Have you noticed a change in mood, downbeat at all? Has he been the same as what he's been jovially when he first came in? Or is the Tottenham job really wearing on him like it weared on Conte, Mourinho, Nuno towards the end of their respective reigns?
Oh, God, they all sort of roll into one. I'm trying to think. Because there's been so many. It was like Arsenal, pre-Everton. I wasn't at Everton. I'm trying to think when he was very down. He was in a really good mood after Tamworth, surprisingly.
Sure.
But I think he sort of knew it was Tamworth's day, and he kind of let them take the adulation. He was very low after Arsenal, unbelievably kind of passionate and full of kind of anger after Newcastle. Because I think he just saw a team really kind of go hell for leather with one of the most informed teams in England, and deserved more than to lose 2-1 to, obviously a frustrating correct, but feels like how can it be correct handball decision. So yeah, there's been a mixture. He's always very good in the pre-matches generally when he's kind of, got time. It's not after a game. He said it himself. It's very easy to kind of poke the bear and wind up the bear in the post-match press conferences, because he really does care so much, and that's why he's kind of so. He wears his heart on his sleeve in terms of that. He really shows how frustrated he is with kind of the defeat and with certain decisions. But some of them have been very short, the post-match defeats. But no, he's. He seemed like he was in a good mood today, and I wondered if he might be. He's no Romero, but he's sort of boosted him being back in training, and hopefully that's given everyone a lift to know that kind of a real quality key player is close. He's able to train with a group, and hopefully it gives everyone that little bit of belief that there is a little bit of light at the end of the tunnel soon.
Yeah, just on that point, I'll come around to Shawnee on this. We've spoken about how big this week is. A lot of the great journalists that have been on the circuit around Spurs. Shawnee, we know going into this game against Hoffenheim, they've also had relative struggles in terms of their own domestic form. We did joke beforehand, and Georgie reminded me they just picked up a win in their last game, which is just so kind of typical that they've just found their form just before they played Tottenham. But they've had a really, really disappointing season overall. As a Hoffenheim side that normally are kind of in and around, you'd say the kind of top 6, top 8 of their respective league. What's your confidence feeling like, Sean, for Hoffenheim? Do you think we can get a result here? We need a result, don't we? I think these next 2 games we've got, just to put it in perspective of that Europa League table, Spurs do currently sit just outside of the automatic qualifying places, and you'd argue now Tottenham are in a situation where they probably need at least 4 points from the last 6. I think if you get 4 points from the last 6, you're comfortably finished in there. You probably describe this one. Look, Elfsborg, everyone seems to be thinking that's a given. We're going to win that. I'm not sure of our form at the moment. Surely you can say any game's a given. Do you feel confident going to Hoffenheim away? It's a German side. Again, German opposition hasn't always been easy for Tottenham away from home. What's your gut feeling going into it, Shawnee?
Yeah, well, it would have been a lot stronger had it not been for the fact that they've got a new manager bounce. It feels like at the moment we should rename Tottenham to like Tottenham like new manager Bouncenham Hotspur or something like that. It's just it seems ridiculous that every time we get to play one of the easier fixtures, there seems to be something changing in that club's outlook that gives them a reason to be optimistic. It is what it is. Look, Ange's form in Europe at Celtic away from home wasn't great. Tottenham's form over the last God knows how many years in Europe away from home has been shambolic. So, yeah, I don't think it's going to be easy. Anyone that is expecting us to go there and get 3 points, despite all of the injuries, just if you just zoom out and think about every other manager, every other squad that we've had, and every other injury situation, then I don't necessarily think that it's going to be 3 points. If I'm entirely honest, I probably, if you offered me, and this sounds so defeatist, but if you offered me a point right now, I'd probably bite your hand off for it because just get it out of the way. As long as everyone comes back healthy. I don't know too much about Hoffenheim. Forgive me, I'm not that clued up on their situation or their players, their strengths there. I haven't had a chance this week to dig into where their threats are. But I would take a point right now if we can go there, put in a solid performance, and then come back, put that one to bed, and then hopefully get 3 against Leicester. And then obviously if Elfsborg at home, it's obviously nothing to give me, like you say, Ricky, but 4 points should be enough. And then not having to play those extra 2 games will be meaningful, I think, given what else is coming up. And they've got the tricky FA Cup tie at Villa. We obviously got the Carabao Cup to look forward to. There's lots of reasons to be optimistic in the cups. But this one, I don't want us to get, I'm not certainly going to get, too disappointed if we walk away with a point. I'll be quite happy with it if I'm entirely honest. Yeah,
I mean, surely look, it's been described for many as a bit of a make or break week. To not put even more pressure on that when I say a kind of statement like that, make or break week. George, we said off air about Hoffenheim. I mean, they've taken 17 points from a possible 54 this season. They've moved up to 15th for that win at the weekend. I think when you look at their Europa League form, they've taken 83% of their points at home in the league phase, and they remain unbeaten at the Pro Zero Arena. But this will be their last opportunity to make home advantage count. I mean, Shawnee said there he'd take a point. That would mean it would all go down to the Elfsborg game. How do you feel, George, about that possibility where it would all rest on Elfsborg at home, given our current run of form? Do you think we can go there and just take a point, or do you think we need to go there and win the game? Because it's difficult. I mean, he's in a situation where Leicester's a massive game as well in the Premier League. It feels like they're 2 must-win games, George. Is that fair, me suggesting that, do you reckon? Are they 2 must-win games?
It does feel like that, but you just look at the, there's a world where Spurs' bench, the most experienced player on Spurs' bench tomorrow, outfield player, will be Mikey Moore. I think if Son starts, your bench is probably going to be, maybe Whiteman, Forster, Callum Olasesi, Casanova, Ajay, Moore, and Lancashire. That's going to be your bench. So that's kind of like...
all be home in time for school the next day. It's quite worrying, isn't it?
Yeah. Malachi Hardy, the 16-year-old.
Doctor's note to sign off. Or school notes, should I say, sorry.
So that's... It feels like it is must win, but then you look at that and you're like, God, if you can't get, you've got to get another 90 minutes into Decker, you need to get, Richarlison's probably can't play 90 minutes, but you're going to need him to play as near as possible. I probably could see a world where we get a draw tomorrow.
Is that enough?
Yeah, it's just so tipped.
Is that enough? Do you think going into
it might be because Spurs are 9th. They're level points with Rangers, who've got 11 points, and Man United are just one ahead of them. I know we've got the table there, and Rangers and Man United play tomorrow. So you'd kind of think if Spurs got a point, they'd go ahead of they'd go ahead of Rangers. And there's a little bit of a gap. What's that? Porto on 8, so they wouldn't be able to get Spurs. A few of these teams have already played. Like Galatasaray have already played, so Spurs will go level on Galatasaray. So I think a point there, and then you win at home next Thursday against Elfsborg. I think that will be enough for top 8.
And how much do we not want, George? I'll ask you very quickly. How much do we not want those 2?
Can't have it. They need the clear week. They had a clear week after the Wolves game to Newcastle, which was the first time they've had a whole week. That was actually only 6 days, but the first time they've had a whole week since August. If you take out the national breaks, they just need to have 2 clear weeks in February just to kind of even to get the injured players back, just to kind of ease them in, not to have to play every 3 days, because that's been the killer. So yeah, I think the top 8 is essential. Even though I'm sure the extra game at Tottenham would be good for the revenue, but no, I think it's really, really important that they can get that top 8. And I think there's I've just written down what my team would probably be tomorrow. I mean, there's not many options, but it's it's not you're going to have a kind of a Maddison, Bentancur, Bergvall midfield. Kulusevski, Richarlison. I'd be really tempted to play Mikey Moore. I think from the start. There's quality there. And even though a lot of them are knackered, there's Bentancur shouldn't be knackered. Richarlison shouldn't be knackered. Moore shouldn't be. So there's a little bit of freshness to go into that. And obviously, Ben Davis has got 90 minutes under his belt. He should be better for that because he was rusty at Everton. But I don't think the plan would have been for him to have played the whole game, but Dragoson's to go off at half time as well. So no, I think there is enough there to get a win in normal circumstances, but given everything sort of that's happened over the last 2 months, it's not really normal circumstances. But no, I think it's important that they get something there just to kind of something to build on. Yeah, exactly. To stop the rot, to go into have a little bit of positivity going into the Leicester game. And that's kind of what they did at Rangers before. Before Rangers, it was Bournemouth and Chelsea defeats, wasn't it? I felt like there was another one. They got a point at Rangers. It didn't feel like the best result in the world, but it just kind of stopped the rot. And then they got on a little run and beat Southampton and Man United. And hopefully that's what happens. They can either get a win or they can get a point, and it will kind of be a kickstart for this next little period, which is obviously crucial for Ange, and he's got to win games during this period. Obviously, we all know that.
Yeah, I'm going to try and leave the show on a positive high, and rather than talk about our injury record, I'm going to leave you where we are with Hoffenheim's injury record as we look to wrap up. Hoffenheim almost have an injury list to rival Spurs. They've got Bebu, Bolter, Kabak, Lenz, Promel, Samasuko, Humushu, because he's a testing names for me, I tell you, all sidelined, and former Tottenham Hotspur transfer target Gift Orban is ineligible for the game, having only arrived from Lyon this month. That's a good sign, isn't it? Because you could put your money on it, like Dominic Calvert-Lewin, he'd score against us, right? 100%. You know that about it.
I was tempted to put money on it just to make myself feel better, so that's good.
Well, save your money, George. Save your money.
I'm sure somebody would have taken that bet. I think Solanke to score against Everton was available. They're not foolish, are these bookmakers?
Absolutely not. They're getting so much money off us at the moment as a cursed club. You wouldn't make it up. Look, it's got to say it's been a fabulous show. Easy questions to close it on. Shawnee, prediction for Hoffenheim. What are we going for? Let's give you a nice and easy one to close on.
I am going to say there'll be goals, and there'll be 4 of them. 2-2.
2-2. So it is going to go
just
down.
Quickly, Ricky, if you don't mind having a little shameless thing before it's the last thing I'll say. Obviously, you've been brilliant plugging the Spurs Talk Show. I really appreciate it. Just a friend of the show, Johnny, and I have started a new channel which talks about things outside of Tottenham, about football more broadly. So if anyone's interested in that, then Football Inc. is where you can find Johnny and I that are trying our new venture. So appreciate you, Ricky. George, great to meet you, mate. It's been a really great chat.
I say that's a chance to get a bit of a respite away from Tottenham to about other clubs. Shawnee, you're so lucky. I'm stuck with this bloody club. I can't get away from them. Can I also do other content apart from Tottenham? I won't ask
Love
George
Island, Rick. Let's do a Love Island podcast.
Yeah, Love Island
podcast. We've missed it tonight.
I'm going to catch up now, George. I've owned the missus. I'm going to catch up on it. Let's get out of here. And there's a secret out of the bag. That's the guilty pleasure at the moment to get us away from this basket case of a football club. George, I've got to say, mate, it's been an absolute pleasure. We know we've taken you way over time. We're blessed to normally get you during the January and in the summer. So, mate, listen, it's been an absolute pleasure. Where can we find the latest writings that you provide for us in terms of Tottenham, where I want to say on a match day, you give us that kind of minute-by-minute coverage of that games when you're there. Just splendid coverage. Where can they find you, George? And before you tell us, you got to give us a prediction for Hoffenheim. What are you going to go for?
Oh, what shall I go for?
Sorry, mate.
I quite like predictions normally, but they've not been good lately.
Tell me about it.
I did say we'd beat Liverpool. I did say to a lot of people we'll beat Liverpool in the cup, and I still think we'll get through. Call me mad. I think that we will win 3-2, and I can see Mikey Moore getting his first goal. So to clip that up at 7:30 tomorrow and make me look like a genius. No, I'm on Twitter and I'm on Blue Sky a little bit as well. I started gravitating towards Blue Sky, and then I've kind of come back a little bit to Twitter. but yeah, you'll yeah. I mean, to be honest, I can't. Obviously on you only get so many characters on Twitter, so I can't often say too much on Twitter. But it's been good fun, chaps. So I appreciate the invite to come back on. It's been good to chew the fat. We had a lot of fun, haven't we? Despite the misery we've been talking about.
Oh mate, I wish there were better times to talk more positive things. But you do, just to leave us on a high. George has said it consistently throughout this show that we are in 3 cup competitions, and he's just tipped us to beat Liverpool. So for the basis of all there, I'm going to leave us there. I'm going to encourage you, like I say, make sure to keep following Shawnee over at the Spurs Talk Show, Football Inc. as well. For more, come on, Shawnee. I can see you want to come back in there very quickly, please.
I'm not sure I heard your prediction, mate. You don't get away with one.
Oh, am I getting away with?
Put your neck on the line, buddy.
Guys, we've got to turn this around. I'm going to say a 3-1 Spurs win because I can't face going into Leicester not having a win up before that game. I'm going to say 3-1 Spurs. We're going to be hopefully home and host to some degree. I think maybe you both have kind of got it out of me as the show's gone on. I'm becoming more positive, which is crazy. Don't ask me tomorrow morning first thing, because it might be a different prediction in hindsight. But honestly, it's been a real pleasure. I want to say a massive thanks to the wonderful Shawnee over at the Spurs Talk Show, Football Inc. Also, please go and check that out. The wonderful dual sessions, of course, from PA, the man that you hear behind the scenes in the pressers and more. He will be asking those questions that may get harder and harder. They could get slightly easier, depending on the week we have. I want to say a massive thank you to the wonderful George Sessions. Please go and check him out. Blue Sky, X, and all your things you need for Tottenham coverage over at PA. George, thank you so much. You've been an absolute superstar. Well, there you go. We have been the last one on Spurs. Over 8,000 of you have come and listened and watched us. God, what are we doing to the Spurs fan base right now? Thank you for sticking with us. And look, we'll be back for more very, very soon. From myself and the wonderful Sean Butler from the brilliant dual sessions, being the last one on Spurs. Keep safe, keep well. And as always, come on, you Spurs.